I wanted to talk a little bit more about my stay at Instituto Lama Tsongkhapa, because I led a 4-day course, a 3.5-day course there on working with anger. It had almost 100 people. It was really good attendance. Yeah, the whole room was filled. And what I did is I talked from the Dharma perspective in the morning, and then in the afternoon, I showed Marshall's video, which Venerable Ciliana could do simultaneous translation of while it was showing. And then we stopped the video at the time when, there were the nonviolent communication exercises to do. And so we did the exercises, we did some debriefing with them, and then we continued the video. Yeah. So that worked out very well. We didn't finish all 4 videos, and I noticed that Marshall really rushed through the topics in the 3rd and 4th videos because he mentioned the exercises, but he didn't actually stop and have people do them and do the discussion around them. And our course was too short for us to do that. So I'd like to sometime have a longer course where we could really do it. And so it's very interesting. For example, in nonviolent communication or NVC, the first thing you do is an observation. And of course, Buddhism tells us that, we have the raw data from our senses, but that very quickly gets elaborated on by all of our thoughts, And so it's not somebody walked into the room, it's somebody tiptoed into the room or somebody stomped into the room. It's not somebody said this, somebody screamed it or somebody whispered it. And also our observations contain lots of words assuming motivations, assuming, the outcomes that people wanted to have. And so this is where Dharma talks so much about inappropriate attention, or what did we call it? Distorted attention. Yeah? And so I think bringing that part into the Dharma, from the Dharma in here is really, really useful, because then you can see how we create this whole scene, and then the feeling that we have from that is directly related to the scene we created. It's because we've lost the raw data a long time ago. Yeah? And so I think, seeing it this way, if it helps us see our interpretations and all our imputations and extrapolations when we describe a situation, and if we can see that clearly, then automatically that affects the feeling that we have from the situation. We won't get as angry, as attached, and so on. Yeah. And then going from having a feeling about something, and then differentiating that from needs, and how difficult it is for people to know what they're feeling and to know what they're needing, because many of us came from families where feelings were not discussed. Yeah, so you never learned to label what was going on inside. And also sometimes where needs were not discussed, or needs were poo-pooed, yeah, made kind of unimportant, yeah. And then, of course, the thing of making a request, which is truly a request and not an under-the-table demand, yeah, which many of our requests, I think, are under-the-table demands, because we're not very happy when people say no. And I think we get very stuck on thinking that other people will fulfill our needs. Yeah? And so turning over the responsibility for our needs to other people, because I have these needs, your job is to fulfill them. And of course, from a Buddhist perspective, we can't fulfill anybody else's needs. we can influence people, but that's all we can do, you know. People's needs come from their own internal mental workings, and the only way to really deal with them is through bodhicitta and the wisdom realizing emptiness. So it made me see that, here's one place where NVC works on a more superficial, conventional level, while Buddhism goes much deeper. Yeah, because in NVC, all of our needs are considered fine. Yeah, whatever that whole list of needs, all human beings need them. They're all completely acceptable. They all deserve to be fulfilled in this life. And Marshall's view is they all can be fulfilled if we learn how to communicate about them properly. Okay, from the perspective of a Buddhist practitioner, I think it's very helpful to become aware of those kind of psychological needs that we have in our minds right now as ordinary people, and to really explore those and understand them, and their causes, their nature, their effects, and so on. And to always keep in our mind that when we get to a certain point in our practice, then we have to go deeper, really analyzing what it means to have a need. And I think when we go deeper, what we find is that our needs are basically based on self-grasping ignorance and the self-centered thought. Okay? So this kind of deflates the importance of our needs, doesn't it? Yeah. And we consider, when we first meet NVC, it's like, finally, at last, here's a system who talks about my needs and says my needs are legit, And then you get into Dharma, and it's like, well, whenever you say, I need this, I need that, it's all based on the idea of an inherently existent self. Yeah? And it's all based on the idea of a self-centered self who needs these things. It's kind of like, I notice when His Holiness talks to scientists, and the scientists talk about like our grasping to be alive, and all the systems, the amygdala and all these other systems that function together in our reptilian brain to keep us alive. And on one level, His Holiness just completely says, yeah, that's the way it is, that's the way human beings work. And then scientists feel, yeah, Buddhism agrees with them. Yeah. And on that level it does. But Buddhism goes a deeper level, yeah, because Buddhism also says these biological needs are based on self-centeredness and self-grasping. Yeah. So we often don't like to hear that about our needs, because we really want our needs to get met. Yeah. And we're quite attached to our needs. Yeah, don't you think? Are you attached to your needs? I'm very attached to my needs. And especially here's somebody legitimizing them. So I don't want to poo-poo the legitimization, because on some level, as we get into Dharma practice, yes, on one level, we need these things to be legitimized. We need to acknowledge having these needs. We need to look at how they function, how we communicate about them, how we can get them met on a conventional level. But we also have to have in the back of our mind that fulfilling these needs is not the definition of enlightenment. Yeah. Okay? And I think a Buddha has no needs like this. Yeah? And So, we're just, when we talk about this, it's on an ordinary level, which is valid and helpful. And I don't advocate skipping over that level and just going to and tell ourselves, well, they're all empty of inherent existence and there's no I, and they're just thoughts anyway, so I'll let the thoughts come and I'll let the thoughts go. Because I think if you do that, you don't really understand your own psychology very well. And then when you're not aware, these feelings and needs and interpretations come up and they color everything you're thinking and perceiving and motivate all sorts of actions that you think are completely fine. Yeah, because you haven't really understood all the twisted way that all these mental, these contaminated, polluted mental factors work in your mind, and instead we just dismiss them. So, like I know for myself, to really, many people apply the antidote for anger of just watching it arise and watching it cease and saying, it's just a thought, let it go. Okay? And I found for myself that I could not do that until I had spent enough time really seeing how my anger was based on an unrealistic apprehension of the situation. Yeah? So it wasn't until I could really see how anger is unrealistic, how it's not beneficial, and really get it deeply, that only then could I say, it's a thought, let it rise and let it go, or, whatever it is. Okay? Because, at least with my way of mental operating, all the conceptualization could just take over and, run a whole thing. And I remember some years ago when some of the Zen students were really shocked when it came out that some of the great Zen masters advocated, were behind the Japanese imperial government in the World War II and thought what the government was doing was fine and great and for the good of the nation. And how the American Zen practitioners were completely floored how that could happen, And, likewise, we see, cultural differences with our teachers. Yeah. And, some of our teachers may think women are, inferior and others don't. And so they still have cultural preconceptions, maybe that haven't been fully, looked at. So what I'm getting at is there's different levels of Dharma practice here. Okay? And so we have to practice both levels, but emphasizing the one that is more important to us at a certain period of time. And so, especially in the beginning of our practice, this whole thing is about observations, feelings, needs, very, very important, okay? At a certain point, you get ready to delve deeper and really look at those needs and say, where are those needs coming from? Instead of just accepting, yes, everybody has them, where are they coming from? What's the origin of those needs? Okay? And so always digging deeper. Okay? But you have to do that at the right time. Yeah, because it is important that we understand the feelings and needs and so forth. So Venerable Tarpa sent me this beautiful text from Jangang Kuntra Lojotaye, and she pulled out one verse of it, which I think is really applicable here, so I copied it out. And he said, multitudes of activities that never succeed. Crowds of thoughts without any meaning. Yeah, I don't know about you, this is describing me. Thousands of needs with no time to cater to them. May I abandon all this agitation and practice the oral instructions. Okay? So you could see with him, he was at that deeper level of practice, yeah, where he could look at all of that stuff and say, actually, there's something deeper that needs to be looked at, yeah. But like I said, on a superficial, we need to understand our own personal psychology. But I've also found that sometimes in understanding our own personal psychology, we get it becomes such a big thing. I remember in my 20s talking for hours and hours and hours about my feelings and my needs. I don't know if any of you did that. Yeah, hours with my friends. This is, my deep emotions and what I'm feeling, and so said this, and he blinked that way, and what the implications were for a long-term relationship. And, you know, and I did this for a long time, and I think it was beneficial. But in one way it was beneficial because I saw how my mind operated. In another level, it's all about me. It's all about me. Forget you, because my needs and feelings are the most important things. Rah, rah. Okay, and I think this is where Buddhism really helped me. It's like, okay, gotta look beyond yourself. You're not the only person in the universe with feelings and needs. There's other people too. Oh, ding dong, really? Yeah. So I think Marshall is emphasizing that too, in NVC, because he's teaching us also how to pay attention to other people's feelings and needs, and when other people can't label their feelings and needs, how to help them by guessing at what they could be or may be, and then that helps the people maybe begin to label them themselves. And it also makes us aware of what's going on with other people. And when we understand their feelings of needs, we often become much more compassionate, because from their way of viewing things, what they're feeling and needing makes complete sense, and we can understand it. Yeah, so that level is definitely important, but there's something deeper. Okay. So I like this when he says, may I abandon all this agitation? Because I don't know about you, but when I really get into analyzing my emotions, oh goodness, there's no space in my mind for anything else. Yeah? Except just analyzing what I feel and what I need. And, so I think Marshall's thing and Dharma's thing of getting us to see, well, other people have feelings and needs also is very, very important. And then also to learn, we don't need to take all this quite so seriously. Yeah, yeah? I mean, because from a Dharma perspective, it's all of this life, and it's all impermanent and transient. And it's all the nature of dukkha. Okay? But to really understand that, you also have to understand how your own psychology works. Yeah.
So when I was here last time, I did MVC for the first time. And before I was into labeling, but using the three afflictions as the standard. So I was like, oh, that's attachment. Oh, that's aversion. Oh, that's ignorance. Well, ignorance goes with all of them, and then I would say, okay, what's the antidote? And then it was a very kind of surgical, kind of aggressive approach I was taking.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I broke down, or at least the list, it breaks down all these different needs, stemming from attachment, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Then I was able to, it humanized these things that were coming up, and I was able to have more compassion for myself. I sort of saw myself as, I'm just a person like anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So, not to be so hard and not to just view it through such a
Yeah.
negative lens. And then also, once you see that and you see it in other people, also, like you said, you can have more compassion for them,
Right.
because we're all struggling with the same things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's quite important. I mean, those of us that often come from a culture of, oh, there's a problem, slap it down and get rid of it immediately. Approach, oh, there's attachment, boing, I got to get rid of it. There's anger, reject, can't have that. And that attitude towards our afflictions is not very helpful. Yeah. I think it's much, that it's very helpful to have a sense of self acceptance, that that's what we're feeling, that's what's going on. But self acceptance does not mean self indulgence. And it does not mean that we let that affliction continue on, because that affliction is going to make us miserable. So we accept that we have it. We have some compassion for ourselves for having a mind that creates all this stuff. And then we also apply the antidote in a gentle but firm way. Yeah? And then, like you said, that does give us the ability to have compassion for other people who have very strong emotions, or very strong afflictions, I should say. And to have compassion and see how they are under the control of their afflictions. And how sometimes, that's why communication with some people can be so difficult, because when we're under strong control of our afflictions, there's something psychologists call a refractory period, which means that at that time, because the afflictions are so strong, we cannot take in any information that contradicts the story behind the afflictions. So if we understand that about ourselves and we understand it about other people, then we understand why sometimes we can't talk about a problem right away. We have to wait until the person is more open and that refractory period is over, so that they can take in new information. And similar for ourselves, to give ourselves enough time to cool down so that we're able to take in new information. Okay? And to do this without this heavy, like, you shouldn't be feeling this attitude, which doesn't help at all. Okay? Okay.